Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Silver Lyming. I am Anne Desjardins, and if you don't already follow me, please do here on social media. You can find me under my name. It's not that hard, ANNEDESJARDINS. And I love to share these stories with you through this podcast called The Silver Lyming. It's a really, I feel, important thing to do to share stories of others healing from Lyme and tick-borne illness, because I know personally how difficult and challenging it is. And stories like this were food for my soul, especially when I was so sick, to help to give me something to pretty much hitch my star to and give me some hope. So hopefully that's what I'm going to do for you as a listener. And today I have a really great guest with me. It's a person that I have met through social media. The power of social media brings us closer together in this community. And Ryan Syverson is here joining me. He is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which I was reading a bit more about, and it's really a great practice. It sounds like that it's really focusing and harnessing the power of the body in combination with nutrition, taking care of some good fundamentals for self. And he has a really nice website, yoursublimelife.com, that you can check out if you're interested to book some time with him or get a little bit more perspective from him. He's there for you. And he does lay out very concisely his story and how he had become involved in this world. And his story starts off a little bit differently, maybe than most people, in that he had some issues going on with mold, which we've talked about on past episodes before, the importance of that and how it can impede people's immune systems. And then he sort of stepped into Lyme. So Ryan, if you don't mind, maybe just share a little bit more about yourself and your story with Lyme and tick-borne illness and how you've come to be here, please.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, it started back in about 2010. There was a lot going on. I was working full time as a network technician at AT&T, and then I was moonlighting as a personal trainer as well, because I've always been interested in body and like supplements and performance and stuff. As being an athlete, I played ice hockey for 25 years. Was in the Marine Corps, so I always like physical fitness was top of line, and I started just getting injured all the time, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was like about 34 at that time, and it just continued to get worse and worse. I ended up having to give up playing ice hockey, and even I started just having like insomnia. I tore my pec muscle, just from doing like really simple things, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Before you know it, I had pain. Like the fibromyalgia pain points, trigger points. I was sleeping maybe 2-3 hours a night. That was like the max. Extreme anxiety. And one morning I woke up and it really literally felt like I went from being 35 to about 95. Took me like 45 minutes to put my clothes on because I was in so much pain, like my back and things like that. And so I was like, all right, well, it's time to start. Let's, go to the doctor and check this stuff out. And, blood work came back fine. You're the spitting image of like health. All the markers were looking good. And I was like, well, and this is probably common to the listeners out there, is like, you're fine. Maybe you just need some antidepressants or go see a therapist. I don't see anything that's wrong with you. And so I was like, all right. So then I started looking at other avenues and started going to see other doctors, and this wasn't getting really any answers. And this was like early on, like in 2010, 2011. So functional medicine was just kind of coming on the scene in my radar. And so that was like the first place I went, saw some of the practitioners in that realm, and we tried doing things there, and it still wasn't working. And then I found this book by Richie Shoemaker called Surviving Mold. And I just had some water damage in my condo in Chicago, and I didn't really think anything of it. But when I got his book and I started reading, I'm like, oh man, this sounds exactly like what I'm going through. And, I asked my doctors and I said, could this be a mold related illness? They're like, absolutely not. Do you have any kind of respiratory issues or anything like that? I'm like, nope. Like, nope, it's not mold. Mold wouldn't do that to you. And I'm like, okay, well, this book kind of says it would. So then I went and saw, I'm like, well, let me go elsewhere. So I went to the head of integrative medicine at one of the top hospitals in Chicago, and I brought the book and all the lab work that he has you look, because when there's mold, and even with Lyme, there are specific markers for inflammation that are not going to show up as a C-reactive protein or sedimentation rate. So I wanted to run these lab markers that in the book that they mentioned, like, let's see if these are elevated. And she said, nope, I'm not familiar with those. Mold wouldn't do this to you. She handed me a pamphlet. She says, you have fibromyalgia. You can buy my book on the way out. And I was like, all right. And I had been doing research on fibromyalgia, and I knew it was more of a diagnosis of exclusion, and they didn't really know what was happening. And I'm like, well, I'm going to figure it out. And so this was probably around like November-ish time. So I'm like, I'm going to get a mold inspector to come out here, because I was like being like completely crazy. Like my family thought I was crazy. My friends thought I was crazy. And I lived in my condo with a roommate, and he was completely fine. And I was going around sniffing my wall outlets because I could swear I smelled like some sort of mold or mustiness. And they're like, dude, you're crazy. But I got an environmental inspector to come out, and he ran it and did some air sampling. And this was before I knew about ERMI and things like that. And I'll never forget the call I got from him, because I went home back to Minnesota for Thanksgiving, and he called me on Thanksgiving Day, and he's like, are you home? I said, no. And he's like, good. He's like, you need to get out of your home. He's like, the level of black mold in your home is like off the charts. He's like, no wonder you feel so terrible. And here, like, I've been gaslighted, invalidated, told it was just old age. I'm like, I'm 35. I'm not an old man. They're like, this is what you're dealing with. And finally, the first person that made me feel very validated and heard was my environmental inspector. And he told me to get out of my house or remediate. And so that was like the beginning of my journey, kind of really going down that. And before that, I kind of dabbled in nutrition and things like that, which helped, but it didn't really stop all these other things. So long story short, tried to remediate, turned out to be a nightmare. I ended up leaving my home. I had to file bankruptcy because I lost my home and my investment properties and everything. And I started feeling better as soon as I got out of my house. But then shortly, I don't know, maybe a month or two after that, like a whole new set of symptoms came, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and bounced around for another year and a half to different doctors before somebody finally said, let's run an IGeneX lab on you, and came back and said that you have Lyme. And that was I didn't want it to be that, because I knew about Lyme, but at the same time, I was like, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with and what I need to go about doing it. And so the next 7 years were me trying to find answers. And you would think living in a large city like Chicago, you'd have a lot of practitioners that could be able to help you. At that time, there was like 2 practitioners in the whole city really that knew anything about Lyme. Most of the people in the area were traveling 6-7 hours driving to doctors. And so kind of forced me to do a lot of my own and kind of meet some other practitioners. And that's kind of how I went through it. And I had some great mentors along the way. And then like 7 years into it, I finally hit remission, and I've been in remission now for 6.5 years.
That's fantastic that you've been in remission for that long. And what a journey for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think you had Lyme in conjunction with the mold? I'm curious, or if you think the Lyme was acquired after you got out of your house.
I think it's hard to say, but I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, so I was always running around in the woods. I had tick bites and stuff all through, like, from being in grade school all the way through high school. I also when I was in the Marine Corps, like I'm trying to pinpoint it, I don't know. But when I was stationed in Australia for 2 months, we were living in the outback, and I had gotten really sick there. So that maybe could have happened, but that was when I was like 21. But with Lyme, it can be dormant in our system for so long. And I think what it was the combination of all the stress I was under, working 2 jobs, and then the mold was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and that weakened my immune system. And then the Lyme was probably already there, and it said, well, we can come out and party now. And that's kind of what it did.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of making me think a lot about myself. Sorry, in particular, it's very similar.
Yeah.
And so then did you just, forgive me if you said it already, but did you just have Lyme, or did you have some co-infections going on as well?
I did. At that time, I don't know if IGeneX had co-infection tests, was just Lyme. Through muscle testing and other bioresonant testing, I had Babesia, Bartonella, like a bunch of the retroviruses and things like that. So for me, Lyme wasn't really the big one for me. It was Babesia that was the really nasty one. And once I finally tackled babesia, that like took me from like 50% to like 75% functionality. And then there was like as you get closer to remission, like that last like 25% is the hardest. I was stuck at 75% for probably like 3 or 4 years. And there's a reason for that, but I didn't know it at the time, but now I do.
And what's that reason?
Well, like, yeah. So for me, like, I like to say like Lyme was my blessing in disguise. It helped me I had to completely revolutionize myself. I mean, being a personal trainer, I knew about nutrition, but I was still following like really heavy in grains and things like that. And I realized that that's not healthy for everybody. And so, shifting my diet, looking at things from a new perspective, because when you're desperate, you're looking for answers. That got me into energy medicine. I started to understand energy medicine and how powerful the mind is. But the real big thing for me too was it helped unearth unresolved trauma and emotional issues that had been haunting me since I was like a child. And I had struggled with anxiety and depression for a good part of my life. But I would run from that by, working out constantly or, running to alcohol or other vices to keep me from dealing with that. And when I was isolated and didn't have the energy or the wherewithal to do anything, I was stuck sitting at home with my thoughts without any distractions. And that was like the growth that I needed because, my body had been telling me for years, like, hey, we need to look at something. And if you don't look at it, I'm going to manifest into something else. And I find that when I work with clients, that's a big thing. I help them on the mental, emotional, like trauma levels, and they make drastic improvements once that block has been removed.
Okay. And so that's helpful in a sense, because one of the things I like to ask people is, if you had any like specific healing moments or anything really stands out to you that really helped amplify or get you across the finish line. So I think that's a really good.
Yeah, that was a big one. Well, for me, like it was like babesia. Once I cleared babesia, like my insomnia went away, my brain function improved drastically. I had more energy. And things were going pretty good, but I still didn't just have the stamina. And like if I were trying to, get back in the gym and do things, I would get wrecked. And so there was other things and I couldn't figure out what it was. But what I find too, and this was happening to me, is I was so focused on my body and symptoms and trying to fix everything. And, like Joe Dispenza, he was a big influence on me and like the work I do with people. He talks about the body, time, and the environment. If we overly focus on our body, be it like our physical looks, our symptoms, and we're trying to constantly fix and trying to figure out what's going on in our body, it takes us out of a creative state and puts us in survival because we're like focusing like too much on it. If we focus too much, this was another big one for me, like focusing so much on time. It's not happening fast enough. I need to jump into another protocol and this supplement's not working. So I need to go on to another one. And before you know it, you've spent thousands of dollars on things that don't work. You have a graveyard of supplements. And I think, this taught me a lesson in patience and like getting away from instant gratification, that this is a process. I was meant to learn something in this. And when that was like a huge shift for me too, is like not looking at Lyme as something that happened to me. It happened for me. It was a wake up call, and it helped me to, once I could reframe that and see that as a gift, that was a major, major turning point as well.
That's awesome. And that's, one of the really nice things that I like to try to point out to people is like, it's not always a bad thing. It is something that can be happening for you and helping you to evolve into a greater state of being, or just to be a more well-rounded human. I don't really know how to insert a better term there, but like it is part of the journey and there is purpose for it and there is reason for it. And when you start to really acknowledge it for that and seeing it more as a teacher as opposed to a thief or a disadvantage, I think that really does help to change that trajectory as well with self and relationship with the disease.
Yeah, for sure.
And then can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing now specifically? Mm-hmm. Because again, I've met you through social media and I was drawn to you because I'm like, oh, here's a guy, he talks a lot about stuff that I'm really interested in. Again, nutrition, exercise, power of helping the body heal. You've gotten better. So clearly I was drawn to you, and I just, appreciate what you put out there. So if you don't mind just sharing a little bit more about that, that would be awesome, please.
Sure. Thank you. So what I do now, I work with clients in a like one-on-one or like a hybrid group, a one-on-one hybrid group kind of fashion. And I have other courses and stuff that I'm coming out with as well. But the way I work with clients is through like a trauma-informed mind-body approach. And this is kind of what I wish I had when I was sick. Because we get so caught up on focusing on the physical aspect and we like hammer diet. And it's like, if we're not getting better, it's I'm not doing the diet good enough, or I'm not doing the supplements good enough, or I'm not doing these things. And trying to help them understand the connection between the mind, the body, and the vagus nerve and nervous system dysregulation, and how personality patterns drive can be catalysts for issues. So people pleasing, perfectionism, overachieving, anxiety, and worry. A lot of all those I kind of resonated with and kind of healed in the course of that, because those are draining our battery. And I'm like I'm a firm component or a proponent of like the terrain theory. So we're never going to kill all the babesia. We're never going to kill all the Lyme. We're never going to kill all the Bartonella. And that's really not the point. I think people think that they get caught up in like, let's kill. But if we can look at the body as like it's lived symbiotically with these organisms for millions of years. And it's all about bringing balance back into our terrain, like changing. So, if a rainforest were to turn like arid, all the vegetation, the animals would die off. And our body is the same. We're a reflection of nature. And so when we can tend to our ecosystem and make sure that we're getting enough sleep, we're hydrated, we're not hurting ourselves with toxic thoughts and patterns and behaviors and beliefs that change us on a cellular level, and we open ourselves up to what can really happen to it, like the power that we have, like to take that autonomy back. That is what I try to instill in clients and bring to them. And like, we can just make some simple shifts. I had a client recently who came in, been sick with Lyme for 12 years, pain, digestive issues, insomnia, couldn't sleep, like really, really rough shape. And within the matter of like 2-3 months of like really helping her with the mental emotional aspect, pain dropped, digestive stuff cleared up, and her terrain started shifting. And now her immune system can keep that in balance. And that's really the goal, is to just knock the bugs down enough to where your immune system can handle it. And then I like to say Lyme is like your co-pilot. If you start living off alignment and you kind of go down, it's like, hey, you need to get more sleep or manage your stress, or your diet's not going so good. And if we can look at that as a gift, because the rest of the population is walking around that haven't dealt with this, or they don't have that co-pilot keeping them healthy. And so we have an advantage over other people in that regard.
I love that perspective. I'm going to picture it sitting on my shoulder, helping guide me through my life. And I definitely feel that it has made my life better for a lot of reasons that way. But it's hard for people not living it to understand that, looking at it from the outside. Like, how do you stay so disciplined? How do you stay so? And it's like, would you change it? Like the lifestyle that you lead now and what you practice to help other people to adhere to a little bit more, would you prefer to go back to like eating McDonald's or drinking alcohol? Like, I don't know if you drink or not. I don't drink alcohol anymore. I would imagine you probably don't drink that much, but if you do at all, but eating the chocolate donuts and the processed foods and the, things that you don't probably really want to ingest sometimes.
Yeah.
Or would you say like you are? Would you rather it be like it is now?
I would rather have it. I'm way more happy, way more healthy now than, I'm 47. So I feel better, both mentally, emotionally, energy, like focus, clarity than I did when I was in my late 20s before I even got sick. Because I was, still eating a lot of processed foods and drinking a lot of alcohol and, not taking care of myself. I thought that I could just go to the gym and eat fairly decent and that was enough. But again, I wasn't tending to my emotional health. I wasn't, I was constantly burning the candle at both ends and not listening to my body. And I'm really good at, like numbing things out. Like if it's pain, I just keep pushing through, but those are signals from the body saying, hey, something's off. Let's take a look at this. And I think a lot of us, especially in, Western society here, it's like, go, go, go. We don't have time for the pain. We don't have time for this. And when we can come back to it and start listening to the language of our body, That's your greatest doctor. It's telling you what you need way more than myself or any other experts or doctors. You're the greatest doctor you have. So.
Yes. And I like that you call that out, but I also appreciate the role that you can play for people because of your experience. You understand it, you lived it, you've walked it. I like how you are coming back to the fact that ultimately it is that individual's choice, ability, decision, but you have to look at all components, mind, body, and soul. Like it's not just one or the other. And when there is that imbalance happening, I often picture a triangle. You have to keep all sides even and equal, and that keeps it as steady and solid. But when one gets out of whack, then the whole thing comes down. And a lot of times I don't necessarily think people have the tools. Maybe they want to, but they're not sure how to address the nagging self inside. And so I think you help to provide a really good avenue for people, again, a safe space. I like your approach in that I think slow but steady. You can't do it all overnight. And time, you had talked about that before with Joe Dispenza, and time is a really big factor too. And having just the determination and the drive, or having somebody like yourself to hold you accountable to walk through it is invaluable.
Yeah.
And so it is self ultimately that has to make the choice, but it's really nice to have people like you who get looking at that. Ayurveda talks, that's the perspective we take from Ayurveda. Again, it's just keeping body, mind, and soul in balance. And then you're going to have a more healthful state and healthful being. Can you recall back when you first started to get sick or feel symptoms? Did you ever question that you were going to get better? Was it ever something in your mind that you were like, oh man, you kind of took a turn and you're like, I don't know about this. And then was there like a major point for you where you're like, I'm getting better, or no, you're just like, you never even questioned it?
So I always like a challenge. When I didn't know what was going on, there was a lot of fear. There was times where I remember when I was at work one time before I knew about the mold or anything like that. I lost my vision it just went into like kaleidoscope, and I could only see out of the periphery. And I was at work. It was at the end of the day, and I was like, "Oh my God, what is going on?" I'm like, I feel like crap, but did I just lose my sight? And it was like that for like 45 minutes. I was getting ready to call 911. I'm like, what do I do? I couldn't even see the numbers on the telephone. And then it just cleared up. I would have times where I couldn't sleep, but I'd be hallucinating. It was very scary. But then once I found out what it was, I was like, okay. And then I was very determined, I will beat this. I will overcome this. But it's, and I think anybody that's going through this knows this, the hardest thing ever is when you make progress and you wake up and you're like, oh, you don't feel like you're run over by the truck, like a truck that morning. And you're like, oh, I have more energy. I have more clarity. My joints and my neck isn't hurting as bad. Okay, maybe I'm finally making progress. And then you feel good. And then 2 days later, it's all over again. It's that roller coaster that just really hits you hard. And that was spiraling me out. I'm like, I thought I was getting better. I just took 4 steps back. And I did isolate a lot. And my mom, thank God for her, she would hear, just breaking down on the phone with her, I can't do this. What's going on? Am I ever going to get better? And then after I would process that and let it out, the next day, I'm like, okay, so that wasn't working. I'm this point. Where can I go now? And I'm just, kind of continuing to work that. But that roller coaster of feeling good and then falling backwards was definitely the hardest part.
Yeah. And I think that's a good reminder for people is here we sit and we're in remission, we're healthful again. And it's yeah, cool. But it isn't a quick transition back to that state. As you said, it took you 6 years. Yeah. And it's a lot of up and down and turns and dive straight down and backward thrusts. And that trajectory out to healing is not a straight, simple path most of the time, unfortunately. Yeah. And that can really be hard. I think when you're I'm doing everything. I'm on my schedule. I've got alarms at 6 times a day for this pill, this pill, this supplement, like I can't march any harder here. Like, what do you want me to do? And then you still don't feel right. It's that can be very defeating. How did you motivate self? Like were there special tricks that you did to kind of say, okay, Ryan, it's not that bad, or you can really get through this? Like, how did you encourage yourself?
I kind of looked at it like, so when I was, this was when I was this was my A Bantam year for hockey, or, my first year of Bantams for ice hockey. And I didn't make the A squad, and like, it really like was devastating to me. And I just remember that year, like, I was like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to do that. And all I did was like train. I got the next year, it's like a 3-day tryout. The first day, they're like, you're on the team, you're good. And like, I think I used that determination and drive that I had from being an athlete and like visualization. Like, I remember I'd be in Epsom salt baths and I would just be visualizing myself, like being that person I was again. And like, and Joe Dispenza talks about when we use that visualization and we bring the future to the present, your brain is the greatest pharmacy on the planet. And it can shift and upregulate all the different pathways and biomarkers in your body to shift you into that state now. And it's starting to bring that into the present, but you need to come back to that. And that was another one for me. So, and anybody who's listening, feel free to share this, but I had an affirmation that I would tell myself. I'd probably say it 100 times or more a day. I would say, I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm vibrantly healthy and full of vitality. And I would say that when I would go on walks. I would say that as I'm getting up in the morning. And as I would say that, I would see the image in my mind of me running hill sprints, doing deadlifts in the gym again, going to events with friends and laughing and smiling. And I could feel the shift in me when that was happening. And that's kind of when I got to like that 75%. I started looking into the personal development and working on my mindset. And that would really help. Or even, like, I would have been, even imagine like my immune cells going and just taking care of business. And I think it came from athletics, like the power of visualization. And then when I got into personal development, I'm like, oh, there's a scientific thing that's going on here,
Yes. And I love that you bring that up, because I've had some listeners reach out to me, and, I've relied a lot on exercise and movement as a big component to healing. But there are people who are not able to move, right? Yep. And some tick-borne illness makes it very challenging for people to also breathe, which I like, that's not the kind that I had. So I really wasn't grasping that. But Joe Dispenza talks about, and I was just talking to somebody about this, how if just picturing something like practicing the piano, for example, just picturing that increases your dexterity by 25%. And so I think about people who are listening who are not as mobile as they would like to be, or not as much able to breathe as they would like to be, to still practice this visualization technique, because there is science to it. There is a lot of truth to how it works. And you can show scientifically, again, how these things are working beneficially for people. And I might add, they can work to the counter as well. Yes. Might be detrimental too, depending on what we're picturing and thinking about. So it works both ways. But in terms of healing and helping self-heal, I think that's a really great call out on your behalf and tool to help people to embrace a little bit better.
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point there too about the exercise, because exercise was such a big part of my life. And when I wasn't able to do that for a while, like I felt like I lost that identity or whatever. But any chance that I had, I would be doing some sort of physical movement or working out if I could. Instead of lifting weights at the gym, I would just do simple like body weight stuff at home. And I was constantly doing like foam rolling and things like that based on my like schooling, education, and personal training. Like when I'd have those trigger points and have that's working through the fascia, and the fascia is it's our connection to source. It's like, because we have our human biofield, because every cell in our body generates an electromagnetic field that combines to create our aura along with our heart, like through like heart math and like that heart coherence. And like our fascia can be really, really powerful as an energy generator. So it stores like easy water. And then there's what's called the piezoelectric effect. So movement, pressure, like foam rolling, or that can stimulate, or it tells the brain connection to release that tension, which then can shift you out of sympathetic state. But it also, that pressure on the fascia, which again is called the piezoelectric effect, that movement creates electrons, which are what power us. And so we can create energy through movement. And Dr. Joe Briscano, who's like one of the OGs when it comes to Lyme disease, he had stated very clearly, and I read it, he's like, people will not get better if you're not moving or exercising. And I'll make one caveat to this. Exercise when you're dealing with like some sort of tick-borne illness like this is not running. It's not any high intensity exercise. It's walking, it's yoga, low level like strength training. Because if you drive your heart rate too up, you're driving cortisol up, or you're going to be stuck in that sympathetic state. It's going to dysregulate your nervous system more, and it's going to set you back. So me being a person who's always like, go, 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 I had to really dampen myself down, because I kept like, oh, I feel good, let me go exercise. And then I would feel like crap for like a month and I'd be set back. So it's definitely learn to pace yourself.
Yes. Yes. And that's actually a good point too, in that it does not have to be Herculean. It can just be something simple, like, again, rebounding, just doing a light, gentle bounce. You don't even have to lift your feet off the rebounder. Just it's like a little miniature trampoline. And like when I started back, I struggled. I laid in a ball on the ground in hot yoga class for like 3 months when I first started. That's all I could do. I just laid there and cried too. I cried a lot. And I think that was just stuff releasing out of my body.
Yeah.
But it comes in all shapes and sizes, but it's just truly ultimately, I think, the movement. And again, looking at Ayurveda, we talk about our Agni, or our life force energy, right? Like that internal fire. And how do you stoke a fire? You got oxygen going to it. And so if we're not pulling air through our body and moving things, circulating things through, how are we ever going to move it out of us and like clear it out? You have to somehow figure out how to do that a little bit better. So I think the visualization technique, again, for the people who are unfortunately at super extremes that can't move or whatever, I think is a good starting point. And hopefully it will start that snowball and allow them to begin to hopefully maybe be a heap of crying, non-moving mess on the floor in hot yoga, to ultimately being like hot yoga champ. Slow but steady wins the race here.
Exactly.
I think another great way to look at it. Do you think, do you have any other words of advice or encouragement for people that are listening right now that you think would be beneficial?
Yeah. So when it comes to this, it really comes down to like, again, like working with the nervous system. I tell like my clients, like working with the nervous system, your mental emotional aspect, that's going to make up 50% or more of your recovery. 25% is going to be supplements or diet. And then the other 25% is like tweaking specific things, addressing specific infections and things like that. One of the greatest things you can do, and this is something that I didn't really realize and embrace the power of till later in my journey, and now I'm seeing amazing results in people that have been stuck for a long time, is the power of circadian rhythm. Like really dialing in and tapping into your free resources, nature, sun, and magnetism. So getting up, like, if you're not sleeping and you have insomnia, getting up and just seeing the sunrise for 2 to 3 minutes, being outside in the morning and grounding your feet, simply like, again, doing, I ran a circadian rhythm reset challenge not too long ago, and I had people that had been sick for 20 years and were in a lot of pain and weren't sleeping. And within 2 weeks, better mood, better energy, sleeping better, there's less pain, simply from doing a 5 to 10 minute just movement session where you stand in place and you're just moving your arms and doing circles and things like that. And if you want to like a good energy thing that you can do that is not going to be too much, look up Donna Eden. She has a YouTube channel. She's all about energetic healing, and she's got I think it's like her 7-day energy challenge. And it's between 10 and 15 minutes of like something that you can do. And it's not only getting you some movement, but very gentle movement that you don't even have to move anywhere. You don't have to go outside. But it's also building your like spiritual and your like the energy in that aspect to help your body build up its defenses to rebalance it.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate that. Call out for a resource for people. And for whatever reason, I'm being guided to ask you your opinion about antibiotics, not to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of curious how you feel about treatment with antibiotics for this type of infection and illness.
Yeah, I think if you're lucky enough to catch it early, I think antibiotics are absolute, like something you want to do. Because if you get it within that first month or so and you get on some antibiotics, your chance of full recovery right then and there is very high. I want to say it's like 95 or 96%, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere around there. For me, I caught it really late. I had been into like the functional medicine aspect and kind of like the terrain theory before I found out I had Lyme. And so I didn't want to do any antibiotics. I didn't do any antibiotics. However, one of the things that tipped off my practitioner that I had Lyme was that I had an H. pylori infection, and my gastroenterologist and functional medicine doctor said, yeah, that could be what's it. And I'm like, well, I want to do it, herbally. And they're like the functional medicine doctors, like, I've tried herbally, it doesn't work. I've helped people with it herbally, but at the time I was like, so I did it. It was metronidazole and doxy for 2 weeks. So 2 heavy hitters. And I didn't know what was happening to me. I had no idea what herxing was at that time. And my anxiety was so bad. I wanted to just jump off a building, and it was brutal. But I did see some improvements, especially in my neck pain. And when I told my DO who was the one who diagnosed me, he's like, that's a tip. So out of my, 6-7 year journey, I did like 2 weeks of antibiotics. But I think when it's in a very embedded chronic state, I think herbs tend to be better. They're more broad spectrum. They're not as hard on you. And I mentioned mitochondria earlier. Your mitochondria are the hub of all metabolism. They control the immune system. They control all your energy. And long-term antibiotics hurt your mitochondria because they're built from bacteria. And if we're going to hurt our mitochondria, we're hurting our ability to create cellular energy, which then is going to impact our ability to detox, with our food. We already know what it does to the microbiome. So I think it's really a personal preference, but I do think that people can definitely heal and recover with an herbal protocol as well.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you weighing in on that, because that's always a question I get asked, and I don't feel necessarily adequately prepared in a sense to answer that. I kind of guide it the same way as personal preference, but knowing what I know, initial infection, yes, I do think so. While it's still in the bloodstream, knock it out, get it out of you if you possibly can. Yep. But once it's disseminated further into tissues and other things, then it is again coming back to the whole slow but steady wins the race. You're not going to kill it. That was something actually you brought up too that I had to accept. I tried desperately for the longest time, kill.
Yep.
I want this dead. You will die. Like that would be my conversations with it. But ultimately it was more coming to accept that we do need to have a symbiotic relationship. We need to share the same physical space. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess there's really neither added. It just needs to be in the shared space. And so I would like to have a peaceful existence and a good quality of life and health. And so we're going to figure out how we can function like that together so that I'm still here. And I think by accepting that it was still going to possibly be living in my body, just not driving the bus, it gave it a little bit of safety, and it allowed it to calm down in its battle against me too. And so it more is at peace as well, because it knows that I'm not trying to kill it anymore, that it's not going to die, but it just needs to behave itself. Right. And maybe your adage too of it being like your co-pilot and kind of constantly there to remind you that you need to really mind your P's and Q's, get enough sleep, get enough stress release, make sure your nutrition stays in place, get enough exercise and movement when possible, and just really learning how to listen to self and maintain contact and connection with self and not and actually acting on what self is telling you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, again, might hear themselves yelling at themselves, like, I don't feel good, or my body hurts really bad, but they're just not really sure what to do with it. So, and that's where I think people like yourself, again, come into play for people in their journey here, because you can really teach them so much. So thank you for your time here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I could keep talking to you forever and ever, because it's like so much, again, I think we have in common just with the athletics. Our story's a little bit the same, how we're kind of healing. And I love that you're really looking at the spiritual component of it, and I say to people about their spiritual health, and I know that can mean so many different things to people. And I'm not just talking about going to church. Like that's the furthest thing actually from my mind when I'm talking about spirituality. It's more of just a relationship and connection to ultimate power, like life force or whatever, however you want to call it. God, people get put off by the word God. It's unfortunate. Universe, however. And so that, and how you're taking care of that relationship, and how are you making sure you're staying healthy within this body and confines of self? Can you go to sleep at night and be quiet with self-talk, or are you constantly being chatted up about something that's bothering you? Those are really good indicators that there's something amiss, and you need to tackle it, or you need to wrestle it, because if you don't, it's going to come out in some weird, funky physical dis-ease somewhere else along the way. And that's another question someone had brought up, is like, do we think that Lyme, or really illness at all, exists, or is it just more symptoms that are there as tools to teach us different ways to be? And not to say that like Lyme doesn't exist, because I've gone through it and I've experienced it, but was that actually like a different experience altogether than something called Lyme? It was just an experience that needed to happen to get me to where I am, versus just actually like Lyme disease. I don't know if that's making sense, but
no, that makes sense. I mean, for me, it was something that I needed to go through. And I mean, I think there are millions of people, tens of millions, maybe even more, that are walking around the planet that have Lyme bacteria or Babesia or Bartonella in them, but their immune system is good enough, and they have that terrain where they're not having symptoms, but they could catch COVID, or they could get in a car accident, have a breakup with like a divorce. That could be the trigger that weakens their immune system, that allows Lyme and these other co-infections that have been put in check with your immune system now to proliferate. And so then you want to rebuild that balance to where everybody's copacetic and happy in that place. So yeah, I think that's it's definitely a thing. And it was my blessing in disguise. It's really what helped me find my purpose and passion, is to help people not have to go through this, or get through it quicker through the work that I'm doing. So I'm very grateful for it in that regard, and for really connecting me. And I was one of those people that used to have a problem saying God, but through my work and working through Lyme disease and helping clients and stuff, it brought me closer to God, and it really created. It took my spiritual health to a whole nother level. And you're not alone on this journey. You are connected to God, consciousness, source, the universe. We're all connected through quantum entanglement. And so you might feel like you're alone, but just know that you're not. There's something here guiding you, and you can tap into that infinite intelligence. And when you build that image, that infinite intelligence works to and through you to create that. You just have to be patient and wait for it, and accept, like you said, and then just have the belief and faith that will come. And that's like the power of surrendering, surrendered over divine timing. You don't have to have all the answers and have to all of the control, but just surrender and know that it can happen, and you will reach your recovery, remission, or a much better state than you are right now. So just keep going with that.
Thank you. That's very well said, and very, you just are very grounded and at peace, and I can tell very comfortable in your skin, and it just translates very well. And that's something that I think ultimately is attainable for everyone going through this, is to come out in a state much more like yourself, in a healthful, grateful, balanced, abundant, prosperous, just like well filled out being of a human. And it is a joy in a sense to have been picked to kind of have had this experience, as weird as that seems. But like, I feel like you is just like, it's molded me into a much better person. And for people going through it, hold on to that hope and know that you can get better as well. And you can sit here like me and Ryan and just have a different look at what has happened to you, a much different relationship with it, and a much greater appreciation for the tools that's brought to you, the gifts that it's given to you, and how it has impacted your life more beneficially, ultimately in the end, than anything. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
You're
Again,
welcome.
if anybody's interested in contacting Ryan, you can find him on Instagram. You're on Facebook as well.
Yep.
Are you on YouTube? I apologize.
I do. It's not really public. That's something that'll be coming in the future. And then I'll be starting a new, I do have a free Facebook group where I talk a lot about this. So it's like called the Secrets to Sublime Life.
Thanks.
If you want to learn, I talk a lot about Lyme, like the mindset stuff, nervous system, gut, you name it. I talk a lot about that in there. So that'd be a great place to check me out. But yeah, I'm most active on Instagram at Ryan, RYAN _ Syverson, SYVERSON.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And again, if you're interested to check out his website, it's at yoursublimelife.com. Your YOUR sublime SUBLYME life LIFE.com. Thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate you listening to today's episode. Any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you, Ryan.